Right now, Australia's second biggest city is on sale. Not a little cheap, it is trading at the widest discount to Sydney in more than 20 years. And almost nobody is talking about it. The city is Melbourne. Let me show you the gap the data has opened up, why it actually happened, and the three forces that are quietly closing it. And these are CoreLogic prices, ANZ economics, KPMG forecasts, and government population figures. This is not a hunch. Start with the raw numbers. The median Sydney house is now around $1.47 million. The median Melbourne house, about $980,000. That is a gap of more than $500,000. It is the largest price gap between these two cities in over 2 decades. Put it another way, Melbourne now trades at just 65% of Sydney's price. Historically, that number sat closer to 78%. ANZ calls Melbourne roughly 13% undervalued against its own long-run relationship with Sydney. Same country, same world-class lifestyle, $500,000 cheaper. But a low price alone does not make something a bargain. Cheap can stay cheap. So the real question is this: why is Melbourne on sale, and is that about to change? First, let's be honest about why it fell behind. Melbourne has underperformed the national average for 3 years running, and 3 things caused it. COVID hit Melbourne hardest and longest. Victoria then raised land taxes on investors, and many of them sold or bought elsewhere. And Melbourne simply built far more apartments than Sydney, so all that new supply kept a lid on prices. That is the honest picture. Melbourne did not get cheap by accident, it got cheap for reasons. But here is what matters. Every one of those reasons is now fading, while the forces underneath are getting stronger. So here are the 3 forces now closing the gap. Force 1 is people. Melbourne added 105,000 residents in a single year. It is now the fastest growing major city in the country, growing faster than Sydney. And the overwhelming majority of that growth came from overseas migration, the largest such intake of any Australian city. On current trends, Melbourne overtakes Sydney to become the nation's biggest city around 2032. More people competing for homes in a city priced like it is shrinking. Force 2 is supply, and it just collapsed. The very apartment building that once held prices down has now swung the other way. New inner-city completions are at a 10-year low and building approvals are down sharply. The pipeline that kept Melbourne cheap has dried up. Vacancy now sits at just 1.6% and rents are climbing almost 5% a year. That is a market quietly running out of homes. Force 3 is the forecasts, and they have turned. KPMG tips Melbourne houses to rise about 6.6% and units over 7% in 2026, among the strongest in the country, and Melbourne still sits around 14% below its own previous peak. Look at those 3 together: undervalued on price, undersupplied on housing, fastest growing on people. Those 3 things very rarely line up at the same time. For a buyer, this is the setup you wait years for. You are buying the cheapest Melbourne has been relative to Sydney in a generation, right as population, supply, and the forecasts all turn upward together. And there is a structural kicker. New Melbourne apartments still qualify for the tax advantages that other property is losing: full depreciation, negative gearing, the capital gains discount, value and tax efficiency in the same asset. That is exactly why foreign and interstate money is quietly rotating into Melbourne, while the headlines are still negative. Smart capital buys the gap before it closes, not after. One honest caveat: on sale is not the same as guaranteed to boom. The banks are more cautious than KPMG, and a recovery is rarely a straight line. But you do not need a boom. You need to buy a genuinely undervalued asset in a fast-growing city and let time do the work. Because Melbourne is not cheap because it is broken. It is cheap because it fell out of fashion at the exact moment its fundamentals got stronger. That is the case for Melbourne, honestly. If you want current pricing on real Melbourne apartments, the actual gap in real dollars, everything is at solomonbloom.com. And subscribe. This is where we decode Australian property every single week.